use the restroom. It is a longer presentation. You could do that at this time out in the foyer to the left. Use the restroom. There's snacks. I don't know if there's anybody with kids here today, but kids if you have wigglers, that you can go in the family room and also downstairs in the multi-purpose room. And then Freya has family packs if there's any families here that you want to get packets for the kids. This is my father-in-law, Tibor. But we're still a couple minutes. You still get to enjoy that cup of coffee. A couple more minutes.
Thank you.
So we'll get started in just a minute or so. All right, we're going to go ahead and start. This is my father-in-law, Tibor, and he'll introduce himself during the message too. But Susie and I are just celebrating 30 years of marriage.
Wow.
And Tibor and Esther just celebrated 50 years of marriage.
Years, yeah.
So they're exactly 20 years ahead of us. And Susie and I have got to hear this presentation in their living room as it's been being put together, but we've never heard all of it. So today we get to hear the whole presentation. Let's pray this morning, and we'll turn the mic over to Tibor. Lord, thank you so much for Tibor and Esther, and thank you for the just brilliant mind you've given Tibor, and just an entire lifetime of devotions in the Bible, but then career in the scientific world. And Lord, you've given him just quite a perspective, Lord, to be able to love your word and love science and be able to see how science is fulfilled in your scriptures, Lord. And so just thank you for this presentation that you've put on his heart and opened his mind to. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Are we live? Oh, good. Okay, good morning. I'm so glad you came, because I can I can tell you that your view of the Noah's flood is not going to be the same after you hear this message. It is not a rehash of other theories and discussions on Noah's flood and all the other things, the age of dinosaurs and the continental divide. I threw that in as the fourth item, so I have a lot of material, so I'm going to have to, at some point, start picking up the pace. But all of this and the death of dinosaurs, all of this happened at once. And you'll see the evidence is very strong. And what else do I want to say? I want to give you a little bit of a foretaste on each of those four areas so that you don't tune out, because some of the parts may be a little bit boring, especially when we go to the part where we say, well, what does the Bible say about when the Noah's flood occurred? So that's a little bit maybe dry, but I want to show you that in the Noah's flood, what God has said and what is there, basically God tells us how the flood occurred. It wasn't just a big, a mega storm that happened. This was a huge catastrophe. And I think you'll appreciate when you see some of the evidence that this, things were blowing up left and right. So, and I want to show you where the water came from. The Bible says where the water came from, and it also says where the water went. But I want to show you the analysis that I did, and my background is analysis in fluid mechanics and thermodynamics, to show how that actually happened in the time. So that's going to be interesting. And then I want to talk, one of my favorite part is the Ice Age. I want to show you the discoveries that have been made on Antarctica, the ice sheet, and in Greenland. They measure the temperature of the ice, and it really shows that this was a super unique event. It wasn't some kind of a cold winter year after year, but this was a unique event. And I'll show you that it happened at the time of the flood. It's there. And I want to talk about the dinosaurs. And there are a lot of new recent discoveries about soft tissue in dinosaurs, in carbon-14 in dinosaurs, which all point to the fact that these dinosaurs didn't live hundreds of millions of years ago, but they lived less than 50,000 years, because after 50,000 years, all the carbon-14 decays into nitrogen. So if you find carbon-14 in dinosaurs, it has to be less than 50,000 years. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about other things that's really unique. And then the fourth part is the continental divide, the drift. The Bible actually talks about that after the flood, and it gives the date for that. So I'll show you that it doesn't take hundreds of millions of years for these continents to move apart, and yet it is a critical part of the whole story of the flood. How animals got to the ark and how they were able to get to the remote parts of the world. So that's kind of like a little summary of what I'm going to be talking about. Now, why am I here? Because I feel that this is such an important subject for young people to understand what the Bible says, because we've been intimidated by the theory of evolution that implies that everything happened millions and billions of years ago, and yet the Bible says, no, this happened thousands of years ago. So there's this big disconnect. And there's a tendency for us to kind of go with the flow and say, well, you know, they have to be right after all. Look at all the super animation they have. You know, it's like a Hollywood production. You see things blowing up, but it's not correct. There's no science behind it. So that's what I want to show you. Why are you here? Because I think you want to know. I think you feel like you don't have an adequate answer about what the Noah's flood and these things happened. So we're in good shape. I want to talk, you want to listen. So let me start. And at the end, hopefully if I stay on track, we'll have a question and answer, so you can ask your questions, and I'll try to answer your questions. You know, the program said it's a fresh scientific look at the Noah's flood. Now, this almost sounds like a contradiction. Science and the Bible. How can that be a fresh look? But what I'd like to tell you is that a scientific investigation is one where you look at the evidence and the theory, and you try to bring the two together. I've been fortunate enough that I've participated in a number of failure investigations. I came from the space program. I worked on the space shuttle, the Apollo program, Advanced Launch System, and other things for about 40 years. So, and my background is in analysis and thermodynamics. So I wrote a lot of the programs that are still being used there. So I have a good, strong basis on analysis. So one of the things when I was doing a failure investigation, and I participated in a number of them, was you have an event, a rocket blows up, you have recorded data, and then you have pieces of the rocket that's evidence. So in a failure investigation, you have to go in and be open-minded, not open-minded, but be disciplined to say, well, I have to look at all the data. I have to make sure that the data that is out there, the recorded data and the hard evidence, all fits in with my theory. It's a discipline that you have to exercise, because there's a tendency, and it always happens, that somebody comes up with a theory and says, well, this is what happened. And so they say, well, this part of the evidence, you know, we're just going to ignore, but you can't. You have to include it, and if you do, you come up with the right answer, right scenario. So looking at the flood is like a failure investigation. We were not there. There are pieces of recorded data in the Bible, and then there's evidence in terms of fossil records, ice sheets, and things like that. So we have to make sure that these two actually complement each other and they're in agreement. So that's what I mean by a scientific investigation and study of the flood. So some of the things that I'm going to be pointing this out as we go is, when I say evolutionist, I'm thinking about not just theory of evolution, but the secular scientific community that does not accept the Bible as fact. I do. They don't. So what are some of the things they actually outright come out and say, well, we don't know this. And these are some of the things that I'm going to be talking about that they don't have an answer for. And in the back, I'll have a score sheet that shows the 17 items that the evolutionists don't have an answer, and the Bible exactly explains what happens. So one of the things is that, as we'll talk about, is that 5,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was all green. People lived there, animals, vegetation, and then in a twinkling of an eye, and this is some of their words, the whole thing changed. It went from a green Sahara to a desert with hundreds of feet of sand, completely covered them. So what happened? They don't talk about that. They don't talk about permafrost. Permafrost is a mixture of ice and silt. And in permafrost, we find prehistoric animals, mammoth, bisons, and are all covered in this permafrost. And occasionally, as the permafrost melts, these prehistoric animals just pop out and they find them. And recently, this is a recent discovery, less than 10 years, they found that there was also dinosaurs in the permafrost, which is not supposed to be there because, there's a big difference in the evolutionary theory between when dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago and when prehistoric animals lived about 40,000 years ago. There's also things that is not mentioned, is that there's a lot of emphasis, and you studied this in school and hear about it, that the last mass extinction was 65 million years ago, but yet we find fossilized mammals in sandstone that are dated, according to them, to be much more recent, a couple of million years ago, not 65. So how does that fit into the picture? Also, I'm going to talk to you about evidence of prehistoric civilizations that all came to an end around 2400 BC, which is what I'll show you is when the flood occurred. It suddenly, a number of the civilization, the Egyptian, the Mesopotamian civilization, they all came to an end, and they didn't recover for hundreds of years. I think I mentioned that already. So I'm going to address all these questions about the things that are evidence that needs to be incorporated into the theory. And you'll see that the Bible answers these things, and the evolutionists do not have an answer. Just a brief thing about my background. As I mentioned, my background is in thermodynamics. I wrote a number of the programs that is still being used on the Space Shuttle program and advanced systems. I wrote this program, this general fluid transfer model. It was the first patented computer program that we got a patent on. And what this is a set of analytical equations that describes fluid processes that later on can be used to analyze a complex system. I have 11 patents on launch system design improvements. In 1990, I was named Rockwell Engineer of the Year. And then later in 1998, I was named a Boeing Technical Fellow. And the Boeing Technical Fellow is a person who is recognized to have a certain expertise. My expertise was in thermodynamics. I was also a member of the Failure Review Oversight Board. We were looking into sea launch failures. Sea launch was a rocket system that launched rockets from the equator, and they had a number of failures, so I participated in those. So, with my background, and I wasn't trying to boast here, I just wanted you to show that I do have qualifications. I do know how to do analysis, because those are some of the things I'm going to point out that you can do yourself and show that the evidence is in support of the biblical flood. So this part is going to be a little bit dry, but I'll try to go through it quickly. And because what it is that I'm going to go through and show when the flood occurred. When was it? Does the Bible say? Now, there are certain critics who say, no, you can't tell when the flood occurred because these are myths. Some of the things that they can say why you can't do it, because they say that the genealogies that are in the first, the chapter 5 of Genesis, it uses the word son, Ben, and therefore he said, well, you can't say that a person, the word son means direct descendant. It could mean a grandson, a great-grandson, some distant relative. So they say, well, you can't use the genealogies. And there are gaps in the genealogies. And usually what they refer to is a passage from the New Testament that says that the book of generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And of course, we know that Jesus was not a direct son of David. He was a descendant in the line of David. So they say, well, see, you can't use the word son. So if you see son, it's not good. And the other criticism they have is that the Bible gives a timeline when a particular patriarch had a descendant. And they said, you can't add these years because they never give you the right, because the Bible doesn't give you you can't add it. So I always say, well, why not? Who said that? Is there a warning in the Bible that if you add these years, you're going to get a migraine headache? There's nothing in the Bible about not adding it. So just quickly show you the passages. And I want to give you here, you may not be able to catch this real time, but maybe when you go back, you can record the references. But these are the references that allows you to calculate the time from the creation of Adam to the birth of Christ. It's continuous. There's no gap in it. So here's the first instance where, let's see if I can do this right. Okay, it's not working, but the first one is where Adam's son is born, and his name is Seth, and it says, begot Seth in his own likeness. So we know in the story that Seth was actually Adam's son. It wasn't some distant relatives. The other place we find it is on the birth of Noah. It says that Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son, Noah. Now, again, we know that he's the descendant, but the other key word here is that it was Lamech who begot Noah. It wasn't somebody else who got Noah. It was he who got Noah. All these other references above it talk about the fact that the patriarch begat. And they were doing the begetting. It wasn't somebody else doing the begetting for them. So with this, there's no gap, and it's okay to add the years. So from Adam to the flood is 1,656 years. So let's go from there. From the flood to Jacob is 452 years. So again, you still continue after the flood. You still have the begetting. And then when you get to the birth of Isaac down here, it says that Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. This is the third time, the only three places that the word Ben appears. But we know that in all of those cases, Ben meant a direct descendant. And so next, this is a plot of, if you add those years, when the patriarch had their descendants, you come up with this time, and it's from Adam to Jacob, to the birth of Jacob, is 2,100 years, continuous, no gaps in that. And of course, this history is longer than our history from the birth of Christ. We're still about 2,000 some years. This is 20, so it's a lot of time. And here again, you can see the references that are there to come up with these dates. So we go on, and now from Adam to Jesus, when you calculate it, I came up with 4,088 years. Bishop Usher came up with 4,004 years. I looked at what he did, and I think I saw where he made a mistake. Who am I to say that? But either way, whether it's 4004 or 4088, we're talking about the same number. We're not talking about tens of thousands of years. So, I'll give him credit. He's was a wise person. But these are the references. From Adam to the flood is 1,656 years. From flood to Abraham is 292. And in the yellow, I'm showing you the date with respect to the birth of Christ, 2100 BC. Then from Adam to Jacob, 160 years, and that Jacob was born 1,980 years before Christ. Now, what happens is that those people who say, well, you can't use the genealogies because they are not complete after Jacob, and they're right. But you have other things that you use. You don't use genealogies, you use events. So from Jacob, you use the event. You have Jacob entering Egypt, which and the children of Israel leaving Egypt. So we're looking at 560 years. So this is the event, and these are the references there. So now we're at 1420 BC. Then from Exodus to Solomon, it gives the date from when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and when Solomon dedicated the temple, it gives the number of years. So again, it's continuous. It's not genealogies anymore, but it's events. Okay, and then this is a little bit, it's an eye chart, apologize about that, but after the death of Solomon, you have the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. And the history, actually, you can calculate the number of years between the two kingdoms, and it's 391 years. And now we're at 513 BC. And then you have the 70-year captivity, and after the captivity, 70 years captivity, these are the references that gives you the years to come up to the birth of Christ. So 512 years, and we're there. So the total years from Adam to Jesus is 488 years. Now there's another, I like to use sanity check. As an engineer, when we come up with an analysis, we have to make sure that we didn't do some mistake. So we have to have a different way of calculating it, so we can verify that our first answer was correct. So this is a kind of a sanity check. You have the secular date of reign of Solomon, which is 965 BC. And then you also have the secular date for Abraham, which is 2128. So you can take those dates and go back, count backwards using the Bible references to see when the flood was. And it comes out, these dates come out to within 35 years of each other, and the date, if you calculate it from Adam to Christ. So again, it's very powerful evidence to show that the date is really about 2,400 years before Christ. This particular chart I like. It's maybe a little bit busy, but what I'm showing you here is the history that's recorded in the Bible. The yellow parts of the graph represents when the patriarchs had their descendants and how long they lived, and going on to Jacob, and then you have the events of the Exodus, the kingdom division, and being carried off to exile. One of the things I want to show you here, which is, I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but you can see the divisions here in 1,000-year divisions. You have 1,000 years after Adam, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years after Adam. Now, what's significant about this is that in the beginning of each 1,000 year, you have a covenant that God makes with the people. The first one is with Adam. The second one is with Noah, and that covenant is about 1,100 years from Adam. And then the third covenant is with Abraham. Now, this is where God makes a covenant with Abraham. Abraham is born before the end of the second 1,000 years. And what's amazing about that is he's born 1,940 years after the birth of Christ, the birth of Adam. And what's unique about that is that if you look at it, Israel became a nation 1,948 years after the birth of the last Adam. So I don't think it's coincident. I think it's there. God has prepared this and planned this ahead of time. But then you go to the third one. After the beginning of the 3,000 year, you have the covenant with David. And then the 4,000 year, you have the covenant with the church, Jesus Christ's covenant with the church. This is kind of just on a side note. Those dates to us look ridiculous. A 900-year average, this is a plot of the longevity of the patriarchs from Adam to Noah to Shem, etc. And they all, before the flood, the average is about 930 years. That to us seems ridiculous. And some people have said, well, those are not real years. They're exaggeration, or there's a different calendar. It's a lunar calendar versus solar calendar. But the data shows that after the flood, something happened that the longevity of people suddenly dropped down. Within about 400 years after the flood, the life expectancy now is about 200 years. And it continues, and of course now, I think the average life expectancy is at 70 or so. So the Bible is continuous, is showing this information that something drastic happened here. This is a chart that I pulled from Dr. Hugh Ross's presentation. And the reason I point this out because I was debating whether I should show it or not, but he has done something that is, he's a fine Christian, but I think he's doing something that is not consistent with the Bible. If you see here on the red, this is the date from Adam to Abraham, that little area, about 4,000 years. But what he has done, he's extrapolated. He took the date for Abraham, and he did an extrapolation saying that Peleg, this guy who we'll talk about when the earth was divided, that he lived at 10,000, 11,000 years ago because of some carbon-14 dating of trees that they found on the Bering Strait. So he used that date, and he was doing some extrapolation of the genealogies that I showed you earlier, and he comes up with dates that for the flood to be 25,000 to 55,000 BC, and for Adam to be 90 to 50,000 BC. So this is, of course, is completely inconsistent with the Bible. If you have, for example, if you had Adam living 50,000 years ago, and if you only have a record of the genealogy for 5,000 years, then what good is it? So basically, he's with his viewpoint, he's negating the Bible, the validity of the Bible. So I just wanted to show that to you. So how did the flood occur? Okay, this is when it starts to get interesting. How did the flood occur? The Bible says that when the flood occurred, that God destroyed all flesh, including animals, men, and everything living. And this is just, says, I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. And then he reiterates, and all flesh died. After the flood, it says all flesh died that moved on the earth. All flesh. And then birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth and every man. All whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life. All that was on the dry land died. So this gets re-emphasized what happened. And it says in Genesis, after the flood, and so the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits, about 23 feet upward, did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. So it not only says that all the animals and humans died in the flood, but that the water level covered all the mountains at least 23 feet above the highest mountain. I found this is an incredible website if you ever get a chance to go there. This is a record of all the mammal fossils that were found. So according to the theory of evolution, these mammals would have lived after 65 million years. And you see about 500,000 fossils everywhere on the earth. They're everywhere. Even down in Antarctica, you see mammal fossils. This is not supposed to be there, because if you have a mass extinction at 65 million years, what caused this mass extinction? How come these mammals, who were supposedly living more recently, how could they be fossilized? But it's there. The data is there. So it shows that there was more than one mass extinction. Well, actually, per the Bible, there is only one mass extinction. Per the evolutionary viewpoint, there have been 5 mass extinctions. And I'll tell you why there are 5 and why not 1. Okay. So another thing is, was the flood local or global? This is a discussion that well, did people live in the Mesopotamian area? They died, but the rest of the world, the animals survived and things. But well, here's the Bible said that all flesh was destroyed. So if the flood was local, then Noah didn't have to build an ark. He could just, move away to another area, away from this location, take his animals with him. He didn't have to collect the animals, and of course birds could fly. They wouldn't have to be in the flood, in the ark. Noah was in the ark for about 8 months, so that was a long time. God promised after the flood never to destroy all flesh by flood. Now, there have been some really severe floods throughout history. One flood was in 1931 in China, where the estimate is 1 to 4 million people were killed by the flood. So God didn't say that he's not going to destroy, not going to allow floods to occur, but he's not going to destroy all flesh. There would be no death of all flesh. Another interesting point is that as far as we know, the ark was built in the Mesopotamian area, but it ended up in the mountains of Ararat. So here's a kind of a picture of what Mesopotamian area, as we know, was at the time of the flood. The civilization, Egypt, Mesopotamian here. So somewhere Noah lived here and built his ark here, but then he ended up on Mount Ararat, on the top of the mountain. So as you can see the terrain, if the water had to be high enough for the water to carry the ark up to the mountains, it couldn't just stand in one location and not flow to the rest of the world. So evidence that this was a global flood, not a local flood to destroy all men. The start of the flood. The Bible gives a really interesting description of how the flood, where it came from. It gives the date with reference to Noah's birth. It says that when Noah was 600 years old, that the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. So this is an interesting description because, and it rained 40 days and 40 nights. The Bible says that the water came from the fountains of the great deep. There wasn't a big mega storm. It wasn't the water canopy idea that water was suspended in the atmosphere and at this time it discharged and came from above. But it says the water came from the fountains of the great deep. Now, the emphasis here is it came from the great deep. It wasn't just from subterranean water, but from the very deep part of the earth, great deep. And the other thing is it emphasizes that there was a failure of the crust, that it broke open and this water came up from above, and then it rained. So you have a a connection between the fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven open. They come together. It starts with the fountains of the great deep breaking open, and then you have the rain. And then you see when it's over, the fountains of the great deep are stopped, and the rain stops. So the rain is actually a consequence of the fountains of the great deep breaking open. Noah, of course, wouldn't have known about this because all he saw was rain and whatever was falling around him. He had no idea what. But this is God's word, and we're finding out now that there's an enormous amount of water, subterranean water. I'll be pointing it out a little bit in a few charts, but they discovered recently, again, this is like in less than 10 years, that there's 3 times more water below the crust of the earth than there are in the oceans. These are not Christian, Bible-thumping people. These are the scientists that made the discovery that confirms that there's water there. This is a picture of the evidence of the Continental divide, where it broke up, where the cracks opened. This is where we believe the cracks occurred and caused the continents to split apart. And later on, I'll show you that this particular area is still active. There's still water coming out from that. These are discoveries of hydrothermal vents. Okay, and so this is the evidence that the fountains of the great deep were actually open. There's scars. People liken the earth to a cracked egg. It's cracked all over the place, and these cracked eggshells are floating on top of the yolk. Okay, so the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. I like this illustration because it shows to some degree what happened. There was a violent event. The earth broke open, and this high pressure, high temperature water jetted up into the atmosphere, brought with it sand, mud, and silt, and came crashing down. So it wasn't like just a bad storm. It was a violent event. And so because of that violent event, the water and the mud and things that suddenly came back from the atmosphere, some of the water was turned into ice when it went high enough, and we'll see that. But it was an event that totally covered the earth and created the mass destruction. The end of the flood is recorded. It says the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. So again, I mentioned this, that the two are not independent of each other. It wasn't like a big storm that suddenly ended and then the fountains of the great deep stopped. But that one was the consequence, the rain was the consequence of the fountains of the great deep breaking open. Okay, so this is kind of a key to understanding the mechanism for the flood, that the two are connected. The water comes up, and then it stops, and then we'll talk about where the water goes after the flood is over. I'm just going to go through this real quick. This just happens to show in the Bible the timeline from when Noah enters the ark. He waits there 7 days before the rain and this fountains of the great deep open. It rains for 40 days, but now what's interesting here is that in a matter of months, you have the water returning back to where it came from. So this is a challenge for people who believe that the water returned because the mountains and the continents were lifted up, and so the water drained down. That had to be really fast. Or the people who assume that the waters returned because the oceans were evaporating and depositing ice on the Greenland and Antarctica. But we'll see how this happened. It wasn't neither one of those. It returned rapidly, and it took about 8 months, 5 days for the water to drain back, another 2 months and 25 days for the earth to dry. Of course, you have to have the earth dry so that vegetation can grow and the animals that are not coming out of the ark are able to eat and survive. Okay, this is really key. The Bible says that the waters returned from the earth continually. The word return in Hebrew is sub. What it means is that the word itself means it returned to where it came from. It always means that. Always means that it returned to where it came from. It didn't just drain off the continents or return back to the, if you think of the water canopy theory, it didn't return back into the atmosphere. And these are examples where this word is used. It says that God said that from dust thou art and to dust thou will return. Again, talking about from where Adam came and where he's going after his death. Then the story of when Noah releases the dove. When the dove is unable to find a place to land, he returns back into the ark. Again, the same word is used here. And then in another instance, it talks about the handmaid of Sarah. When she runs away from Sarah, the angel tells him to return to your mistress and submit yourself to her. So it's always, the key point here is returning from where it came from. So this implies that if the water came from below the crust of the earth, it's going to return back there. But how does it happen? Okay, I think I kind of touched on this already, so I'll skip it. So I use my experience of thermodynamics on the flood to illustrate, to show you that it actually can happen without just by under gravity go back. So this picture I have shows what the conditions before the flood. So you see in the bottom there the mantle, and these are the temperatures that are estimated for the mantle. Is about 870 degrees Celsius. Above it is the subterranean water chamber. So we don't know what the temperature is, but I assumed 700 degrees Celsius because it's close to the mantle temperature. And of course, heat is being conducted from the interior of the earth to the surface of the earth through the crust. I chose 10,000 atmosphere, and the reason I chose 10,000 atmosphere because later on, when we talk about the Greenland ice sheet and Antarctica, those ice temperatures were generated by water being exposed to very low atmospheric pressure. It has to be up into the 200,000 feet altitude for it to generate this super, super cold temperature. By the way, there's no explanation for that except for the Bible. They don't know why the temperature in the Antarctica ice sheet is minus 32 degrees Celsius. In Antarctica, it's minus 53 degrees Celsius. There's no mechanism. It's not your annual snowfall. So I chose the 10,000 so that I can eject the water high enough in the atmosphere. So now, the conditions during the flood, so the water, the Earth's crust breaks, and then you have the water from underground being ejected high into the atmosphere. And it takes with it dirt, sand, it erodes the crust, and it ejects it up in the atmosphere. So what you have coming back down, depending on how high the water jet went to the atmosphere, you have snow, sand, silt. And we'll show you that this is exactly what they find in Greenland. They find a mixture of ice and silt, which is not supposed to be there. Or on the Sahara desert, you find incredible amounts of sand. Okay, so this continues until the pressure in the subterranean cavity, the 10,000 atmosphere pressure, until it decays and comes to equilibrium with the water column above it. It keeps flowing until that happens. Once that happens, then flow coming from the subterranean cavity stops. Now, what happens after that is the water now starts to flow back into the subterranean cavity because it's colder, and as it seeps back into the subterranean cavity, which is still hot, 700 degrees Celsius, it cools that, and it continues to cool, and water continues to flow back into where it came from. So think of it like if you had a pressure cooker and you heated the water and you release the pressure in the pressure cooker, and all the water or whatever comes out of the pressure cooker. But now, when that's done, when it stops coming out of the pressure cooker, if you put that inside a swimming pool, insulating the side, it will suck water back into that pressure cooker because the colder water coming into that pressure cooker that has the hot water cools down, the pressure drops, and it keeps sucking it back in. So that's what happens. Now, this actually is a kind of the thermodynamics of what happened there. Like I said, I use 10,000 atmosphere pressure. This represents condition 1 represents the origin before the crust breaks open. It's at 700 degrees and 10,000. And these numbers are not sacred numbers. This is just to illustrate the process of outflow and inflow without having any, just under gravity. It's just the nature of high pressure supercritical water. The curve down below, okay, this is a good one. The blue line represents the pressure in the oceans and the final pressure where the water starts to flow back into the subterranean cavity. It's about 80 atmosphere. It could be 100 atmosphere. It doesn't really matter because the difference between 10,000 atmosphere and 80 atmosphere is not much. But what happens here, and this is the interesting thing, that supercritical water has this property that when it's at a low pressure, it goes through a large change of density. So what you have here is that you start out with condition 1 before the flood. The crust breaks open, and it's flowing from 1 to 2, flowing into the ocean, flowing up and continuing to flow. And what happens is that in this pressure difference, 75% of the water that's contained in the subterranean chamber comes out. And when it comes out, the pressures are equal now between the bottom of the ocean and the subterranean chamber. So then the next path is the refill. As I said, that you have ocean water that's much colder, minus 5 degrees Celsius. It could have been more than that. It could have been 10 degrees. Doesn't really matter. But it's so much warmer, so much colder than the subterranean chamber pressure, chamber temperature. So as the water starts to flow back into the chamber at nearly constant pressure, you start refilling this, and you end up having the same density. 0.3 is the same density as 0.1. So you had outflow and then inflow. So it's amazing. So the Bible, where am I? The Bible is really amazing that it gives this description, and we can verify it through analysis. Again, those numbers can be different, but it basically shows the principle of how the water could go back in a very short period of time. So, is there water under the crust of the earth? Yes, obviously, or else I wouldn't be here. So, there's the Russians had a project was called the Deep Hole Bore Project. They did this back in the what was it? Back in the 70s, I think. I didn't put the date down. But this is the deepest hole that they drilled down to. It's drilled down to 7.5 kilometers, the deepest. And they stopped drilling because probably run out of money, or it was getting too hot and they couldn't drill anymore. So what they found there in the several kilometers of depth, they found water at that location, which was a surprise to them. They didn't know there should be water down at that depth. But what is even more amazing is they discovered that in that flowing water, there were evidence of petrified plankton, 24 species, single-cell plankton. Now, these planktons live on the surface of the water because they are the ones who produce food and convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. So they're not supposed to be there, but they're there. So this, in a sense, validates the fact that the way you got these planktons down in inside the crust of the Earth was because the water flowed back, as we were saying, at the end of the flood. These are even more exciting. This is 2014. The scientists discovered evidence of vast water reservoir trapped hundreds of miles beneath the surface, capable of filling Earth's oceans 3 times over. So this is an article in Nature World News. Another article, 2017, there is as much water in Earth's mantle as in all the oceans. Just think about that. I mean, the Bible talked about this, that the water came from subterranean cavities. And now scientists are coming up with it independently. So this Stephen Jacobson, I think, was the one who was first credited with discovering water below the surface. He said, this is from a release, it said, the vast amount of water locked inside rocks of this deep region of the mantle will certainly force us to think harder about how it ever got there, or perhaps how it could have always been there since solidification of the mantle. So right now, with that, there's kind of like, what happened? We missed it. You know, the water didn't come from outer space through icy comets impacting the Earth over millions of years. This was already there, so they have to go back and redo their theories some more. This water is apparently locked up in this rock called ringwoodite. But what's interesting about it is that they said that it means that water on Earth may get pushed to the surface from below, even though it's locked up in these rocks called ringwoodite. It can occasionally be pushed back into the surface, contradicting previous beliefs that the water was delivered by icy comets. So this is what that rock looks like. So if you see one, you know what it is. So this is now exciting part. So what's the evidence that there is water under the Earth, other than the fact that they discovered these cavities that are below the crust of the Earth? Again, this is a recent discovery of hydrothermal vents that are located at the bottom of the ocean, and they're located along the fault line, the cracks between the continents. They're all sitting there. So the water is coming out from the hydrothermal vents, and this was discovered in 1977. You see the very energetic jet coming from below. Here's another picture of a different hydrothermal vent. It's continuously flowing. They they actually measure the flow rate to be fairly high, 7 to 12 miles per hour, and it's coming from what we call the fountains of the Great Deep. These are not geysers. This has been incorrectly labeled as geyser. They're not geysers because geysers are not continuous. I worked on modeling geysers for the space program. The oxygen tank has an anti-geyser system. I worked on it and I analyzed that. So I know what a geyser is. This is not a geyser. So where are the hydrothermal vents located? Well, these stars represent the hydrothermal vent fields. There are thousands of hydrothermal vents at each of these fields. This is just what they discovered. They think there may be even more around that they haven't discovered. But the hydrothermal vents are located where the cracks are, where the water came out, it went back, and now now because it went back, it was colder. The geothermal heating is warming it up, and it's starting to expand and come back out of the atmosphere again. It's like, you have your pot on with the gas, you put the lid on, and if you're not careful, the water will come out and overflow. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the overflow from the hydrothermal vents. Okay, so this is just an illustration, of course, of what people think what the hydrothermal and the fountains of the great deep look like with the magma. It's a good illustration, but so, what's interesting is that the Bible talks about the waters being under the crust, thousands of years before the recent discovery. So the Bible is not, just a book of stories. It's actually an excellent book that talks about history, that things that we have never known before. 100 years ago, people didn't know about the hydrothermal vents or the subterranean water reserve. The other thing is that's kind of interesting. I have this Bible reference here that the Bible talks about the crust of the earth being standing in water and out of water. So it implies not only just that there was the hydrothermal, the subterranean water reservoirs, but actually says that the earth is standing out of water and in water, whereby the world that was being overflowed with water. Here's another one in the Psalms. To him that stretched out the earth above the water. Now, before this discovery, this made absolutely no sense. How could the earth be stretched above the water? But now we see it's actually happened. And here's another one. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof the world, and they that dwell in it. For he had founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. So these are references to the fact that there's water under the crust of the earth. So I'm close to finishing with part one. This is just a summary. There are no gaps in the Bible timeline from Adam to Christ. The date is 4,088 years. The date of the flood is 2400 BC, and we can define it by both from the Bible and also using secular history. The flood water came from below the ground and the fountains of the great deep, and the waters covered the entire globe. We'll see in the next couple of sections the devastation that happened. The waters flood returned back to the subterranean cavity under the effect of gravity, and it's verified by analysis. And one of the things that I think I bring to this discussion is that there's a lot of data out there, but there's no analysis to say, well, what does that data mean? And because sometimes the data is confusing, people ignore it. But the discipline is to analyze it, to see what it really, what the data says. The source of subterranean flow has been found in hydrothermal vents and is still leaking out. There's more subterranean water than water in the oceans, both liquid and trapped in rocks. So with that, I'm going to go to the next chapter. If you guys are okay, the next one was going to be a lot more exciting, I hope. Let's see if I can find this. I knew how to do that yesterday, but let's see, I'll find it. Where's my cursor? Oh, there it is, okay. So now we're going to talk about evidence, okay? what is the evidence that we see around us? We talked about the theory, but I would rather go through this just a little bit more, and then unless do you think? I know, and maybe in half an hour we can do it. You guys okay? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to show you evidence of the recent flood. Now, you probably don't think of this as being evidence of the recent flood. Of course, we all recognize what that is. That's the moon, the near side of the moon. What's interesting about this is that the near side of the moon looks completely different than the far side. So this is the far side. We didn't know about this because the moon always faces us as it rotates around the Earth. But when the first time they flew around it with instruments, they photographed it, they were surprised. How come the two are different? If the moon was bombarded by rocks and meteorites and asteroids over billions of years or millions of years, you would expect both sides to be the same because it's being barbecued and it's being pummeled by rock. But to me, this is very strong evidence that the reason the near side of the moon is different than the far side, because the near side of the moon experienced this explosion that happened when the fountains of the great deep, when they broke open. So you have this incredible amount of mass, rocks and ice and things that are ejected, and they head towards the moon. It hits the side of the moon that's facing us, and then the backside is getting secondary impact from debris that's released from the near side of the moon. So that's why the two are different. So next time you're outside and look up the moon, think about that. These dark spots represent not only craters, but it represents lava flows. So it shows that the energy, the impact of those debris that hit it was much stronger than the other side. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. This is again something that evolution doesn't address, but the Sahara was green 5,000 years ago. These are some of the comments that the Sahara went from green to a desert in a flash, from lakes, grasslands with hippos, giraffes, etc. These are quotes from this source. North Africa's sudden geographical transformation 5,000 years ago, and 5,000 years ago is about 3,000 BC, so it's the time of the flood, right? 2400 BC. Per the Bible, 3,000 is that ballpark number. So North Africa went through a geographical transformation, one of the planet's most dramatic climate shifts. Climate models are unable to reproduce the magnitude of this wet condition in North Africa 6,000 BC, 6,000 years ago, or 4,000 BC. So there's no climate models that can tell you why this transformation occurred. It went from green to a desert. The transformation, and these are quotes, transformation took place nearly simultaneously across the continents, North, South, a new study finds. So I'm going to click through these, but these are just carvings that in the Sahara Desert, hippos, flamingos, water buffaloes, giraffes, and these animals don't live there anymore. They're just what was left there by the earlier civilization, gazelles. And also what we find in the Sahara, and I'm going to focus mostly on the Sahara Desert, as opposed to covering the other parts where there's a large sand deposits. They find evidence of petrified forests. So this area was lush with green vegetation. This is what the Sahara Desert looks like today. It's mostly sand. The average depth of sand on the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is the size of the United States or China. The average depth of sand is about 450 feet. That's the average, 450 feet deep. Some places it's as much as 960 feet deep. Incredible amount. So, okay. So not only does the Sahara Desert have sand, but in this world map you can see that it also extends from from Sahara to the Arabian Desert, Iranian Desert, to China, all the way to Gobi Desert in China. And by the way, in the Gobi Desert of China, this is where a lot of the fossils are being discovered, dinosaur fossils. So these are pictures of the sand dunes in the Sahara. Again, you can see the contrast between this caravan of camels and the top of the desert, Libyan Desert, Arabian Desert. This guy up in the top right-hand corner, there's a man standing there. I don't know if you can see him. He's standing there. So it kind of gives you a perspective of how much sand is here. Incredible amount of sand. Even in Iran, not just the Sahara Desert, but all the way across from the Sahara Desert to China. Taklamakan Desert in China. And then this is the Gobi Desert of China, where under the sand and in that area they find fossilized dinosaurs. So where did all this sand come from? There's always a theory. I'll share with you some of the theories. The theory is that millions of years ago, maybe more than 65 million years ago, there was an ancient sea that covered this particular area. And then when that ancient sea 65 million years ago evaporated, it left behind all this sand. The problem with this is that the Sahara went from green to a desert not 65 million years ago, but 5,000 years ago. So there's a total disconnect in this. Plus there's more. Another theory was that the sand was produced by erosion of the mountains from water runoff, eroding the mountains and piling it up on the below. But again, this would have to be, those mountains have to be incredibly large, and they have to be all over this vast area where the desert, the sand is found. Or the other one, I always like this one because it talks about the Earth's axis tilting. You can never argue with that. You know, if the Earth's axis or the orbit changes, who's to argue with that? But it doesn't cause the change in weather and climate doesn't produce sand. So where did some of the myth, where the sand came from? It came from ancient dry lakes. This is a picture of the Salt Lake in Utah, and there's no sand there. It's all dried caked mud. This is a picture of a large lake in Bolivia. It's, I don't know how many hundreds of miles large. There's no sand here again. This is the Mojave Desert, Roger Dry Lake, where the space shuttle landed when it came back from orbit first. It's about 65 square miles. And again, I was there. It's all compact, hard mud. There's no sand there. So the sand, the Bible actually gives the answer from where all this sand came from. It came from the water coming out of the crack, the deep below the crust, and this high pressure, high temperature, high velocity water eroded the ground, the sand, ejected it into the atmosphere, and covered everything below it. And then after the sand settled down, then the water returned back into the subterranean cavity. So it came up, ejected all this sand, mud, and it returned. So there's also evidence in Egypt. The Great Pyramids were built around 2600 BC, and there's an estimate range for the Sphinx between 4500 and 2500 BC. And the pyramids were built about the same time, but none of these were built on sand. It looks like these things, the Sphinx and the pyramids, were first built on dry land or hard foundation, and they were later covered by sand. This is a picture of what they think the pyramids look like in Egypt, about 3000 BC. They all had this very smooth covering, and they were probably painted, they think. This is what they look like today. You see, all of that smooth covering is gone. It's been washed away. The only one that has some of it left is King Khufu's pyramid in the center. It still has some of the surface stones. Not all of it, it's been damaged. But you can see here again, what you see here is that the basic fundamental rocks are there, but none of the surface rocks. All of that has been washed away. It's gone. And of course, I had the privilege of going to Egypt to look at the pyramids, and I'm standing right next to a remaining finished rock that covered the pyramids. Very large rocks. It's not something that you can move easily. Some of the ideas that people said, well, the rocks were actually carried away by subsequent civilization to build their homes and what have you. You know, give me a break. I wouldn't even want to walk up on this thing, let alone go up there and try to loosen some of these rocks. And besides, there are quarries of rock quarries that they can get it. So this idea of going up there and using it as building material just doesn't fit with me. These are pictures of other pyramids. These were all built before the flood. This is the step pyramid, and you can see parts of the surface finishing is gone. The other things you can notice here is there's a lot of sand around them. These are all located in vast amounts of sand. This is the bent pyramid. Smooth surface is missing. This is kind of interesting. I actually took a picture of the base of the Sphinx. The base of the Sphinx has this water erosion evidence, this little runoff. And what's interesting about this is that before, people used to think that this was done due to wind erosion, wind blowing sand and eroding the sandstone. But then this one, oops, let me just go back. I wasn't done yet with that. But then this geologist went there and he said, nope, that's not the wind erosion, because wind erosion doesn't look like this. He said, this is water erosion. So the geologist said, so if it was water erosion, it had to occur at the last ice age. He said 10,000 years. Now, they never want to say 6,000 years because that's too close to the Bible. So they'll use 10,000 or longer dates. And so the Egyptologists were challenged and said, look, we know our history. We have a record of different kings and what happened. Our record goes back to about 5,000, 4,000 BC or 5,000 BC. We can't miss 5,000 years of history. So they have this ongoing argument, was it done by the Ice Age, or was it done after the Ice Age? And so the Bible here is the resolution. Yes, it's water erosion, but it was done after the pyramids were built. Okay. All right. Okay, so in the next few charts, I want to show you pictures of the sand that was there that we don't see anymore because it's been cleared out. So this is the Great Sphinx covered by sand until just recently. These are actual photographs from the 1800s. Okay, here's another one. Interesting, if you're into that thing. So here's another one. You can see the pyramid of the Sphinx being uncovered and the pyramids in the background. Now, another interesting thing is that, as I said, the Sahara Desert is covered by a vast amount of sand, 400 feet on the average. And they're discovering through satellites, through ground-penetrating radar, they're discovering that there's actually remains of ancient civilizations below the sand. So one of the interesting things is that they think that of the pyramids and things that we see, the Great Pyramids, they said there's probably about 95% of it still under sand that we don't know about. So we've only uncovered a small amount of that. Now I'm going to talk about fossils. So this is close to Cairo. This is called the what is it called? The Valley of the Whales. So they discovered these ancient 40 million year old whale fossils in the Sahara. And if you notice that it's in the middle of the Sahara, so what is a whale doing in the middle of the Sahara Desert? And not only that, it's not covered. It's not really, very deep. It's close to the surface. Here's another one that is 37 million year old catfish, again in the same area. One of the things, let me just go back because I wanted to point that out, is in this area where they found this whale, they found not far from there fossilized remains of humans in the same depth of sand. So it showed that when this fossilized whale, when this whale was buried, humans were also buried at the same time in the same amount of sand. So this one. Now, this is called the original pothead for the college students. If you can see this, there's this unfortunate man, again in the Sahara Desert. He pulled a pot over his head. And it looks like he was trying to protect himself because of whatever was falling, and of course he died. It's kind of sad, but here's another skeleton. There are large fields of skeletons that were found in this area, about 250 skeletons. The investigators were saying that everywhere we turned, we saw bones belonging to animals that don't live in the desert anymore. I realized that we were in the Green Sahara. So you see the devastation of life that was there, and now it's being completely destroyed and covered. Here's another person. This guy was found, estimated to be 6,000 years old, or lived about 4,000 BC. So one of the things that was interesting is he had his finger in his mouth, and they have no explanation. So probably the person was in agony, and that was the reason. This to me is a very sober fossil of what looks like a woman and two children. They're holding hands. They're holding hands as they're being covered with sand. So this is not a burial plot. This is a snapshot of humans being buried in sand. And this civilization lived about, again, same age, 2500 BC, to what we think the Bible says. This is another interesting evidence. Again, all of this is out there. And the reason I bring this up is because, as I said, in a scientific approach, you have to answer these other things that are evidences. You can't just focus on one thing and ignore the rest. Otherwise, you're missing the theory is not correct. One of the evidences is the sudden loss or destruction of civilization. The red line represents the old Egyptian kingdom. It lasted for about 800 years, but it suddenly came to an end about 2400 or 2300 BC. This line, the vertical line, represents the biblical date for when the flood occurred. You also have the early Mesopotamian civilization that lasted for hundreds of years, 500 years. But then again, it came to an end about the same time as the flood. And then you have the early Stonehenge civilization that lasted for 500 years, but came to an end about the same times. all of these civilizations came to an end at the time of the flood, because of the flood. It's not just coincident. And the other interesting thing is that these civilizations didn't reemerge right away. It took hundreds of years. And the reason was because Noah's descendants, it took time for them to populate and to be ready to rebuild their society. So you have in the Egyptian kingdom, you have the early civilization, and then you have the middle kingdom, and then you have the late dynasty. Okay, this one I like. I'm going to click through this really fast in the next 5 minutes, but this to me is really evidence. This is evidence that is not about fossils or things, but this is about looking at the current population level. This is the current population level starting from 1650 to when I did this was 2017. At the time, the population level was 7.6 billion. So this shows the rise of population. And the reason I didn't use anything earlier than 1650 because there was a lot of uncertainty about what the population level was. But I had this one. This is good. So if you remember in your calculus class, there was an equation that we learned about, which was the population growth equation. And this is that population growth. So what that equation allows you to do is if you know a certain number of population, humans, bacteria, whatever, rabbits, if you know the constant, the population growth constant, and if you want to know what the new number is of the population after time t, you can use this equation, and it will predict it very accurately what that is. The key is to know the population growth constant. But the thing is that you can solve for that. You can take the data from points on this curve, that's real data, and calculate what the population growth constant is by this equation. This is just a reorganization of the population growth curve. So you come up with a constant like this. And when you go backwards, the black line represents extrapolating backwards. It shows that this population growth actually started at the time of the flood. And I'll show you that if it had been at the time of at Adam's creation, it would look completely different. If the population started with Adam and Eve, the blue line would be where we should be. And of course, it would never be this high. But it just shows that the 1,600 years between Noah and Adam is large enough to completely change the shape of the curve that we are going on right now. So this is an indirect proof that even 4,000 years seems recent, but the population level could not start there because it would be different. There had to be a restart at the time of the flood. Okay. This one is even taking it a little bit further. It just says that if you assume 10,000 years, and you assume that every 100 years, go back. Every 100 years, you would lose 20% of the world population. And that's a large number because to have 20% loss of the world population every 100 years is much more than the death of loss of life during World War II. Europe suffered a large percent, but in the terms of world population, it was only like 5%. So even this says if it started 10,000 years ago with this conservative assumption of regular loss of population every 100 years, you would have astronomical numbers now. So with that, I think this is a good time, Rob, if we can stop here and then go into the death of dinosaurs. And I want to thank somebody put little dinosaurs all over the place. I think that's so cool. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Okay, so let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back. Why don't we come back at 10:45? We'll take a 13-minute break, okay? Use the restroom, stretch, and then we'll finish the material, okay? Just keep your eye on the clock. 10:45 we'll start.
Jesus, where would I be without you? Where would I be without your love? Oh, I can't say thank you, Lord. No, I can't say thank you, Lord. Oh, I can't say thank you, my Jesus, my Savior, Lord, there is none like you. All of my days, I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength. Let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord.
All right, if you can come on back in, we're going to start again.
Power and majesty, praise.
Okay, is everybody ready? Well, let me ask you, so what do you think of it so far? Do you like it? No, I wasn't asking for, but thank you very much. I told you, after today, you will not think of the flood the same way before. The best is yet to come. This is, I would say this part was more of an introduction. Now comes the interesting part, the death of dinosaurs. So this chart is a chart that shows the timeline of the theory of evolution, starting at 3.5 billion years ago, where you had these guys living simple life forms, and then 360 million years in the past were these amphibians. And this particular timeline, and the next one, which continues, is does not represent independent measurement. So in other words, when you see these animals in the fossil record, and I said 540 years, don't assume that they actually went and did a dating on that particular fossil, and they said, yep, that's 540 million years ago, or this guy is 400 million years, or this guy 50 million years. These are not. All this is the scientists, the experts in evolution sat down, and they knew that evolution is a process that takes a long time. So they said, well, this has to happen over a long period of time because simple life forms become more complex over time, not overnight. So they came up with this timeline. And just, again, think about this as strictly based on the theory. There's no evidence of dating. The only thing that is actually able to date something, and we'll talk about that later with the dinosaurs and mammals, is carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 dating can be is good. It has its inaccuracies, it has its assumptions, but it's good for at least 50,000 years. There's nothing that goes back hundreds of millions of years or billions of years ago. So according to the theory of evolution, there were 5 mass extinctions. The last mass extinction occurred 65 million years ago. So I find it interesting is that why are there 5 mass extinctions? The Bible talks about 1 mass extinction, but the theory of evolution talks about 5 mass extinctions. And here's the reason they talk about 5 mass extinctions. Because in the fossil record, you find these simple life forms that are fossilized, and then you find the more complex life forms that are fossilized. So per the theory of evolution, the higher form of life evolved and emerged from the lower form of life. So they couldn't be around because that would kind of defeat the whole theory that things get better and improves. So they had to occasionally take here's a mass extinction, we get rid of these life forms. And then another mass extinction, we get rid of all of these life forms. And then you get to the last one, which was 65 million years ago, which gets rid of the dinosaur. So these are very convenient assumptions. There's no really scientific evidence for this. So to note, before the evolutionists talked about mass extinction, the Bible talked about that with the flood. That was a mass extinction. There was only one mass extinction. As you'll see, that mass extinction destroyed and eliminated all the life that was on the planet Earth, except the ones that survived in the ark. I talked about this. So here's an interesting record. So again, this comes from the Smithsonian Institute. This is out there on the internet that you can go there and look at different periods of the geologic periods. So, but this particular one represents the fossil record from 540 million years to the death of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So what kind of pops out at you here is you see the fossils everywhere on the Earth. It's not localized to like the Yucatan Peninsula where this comet supposedly have crashed and created tsunami waves and big upheaval. It's even going to the remote part of the Antarctica. You see, I don't know how well you can see this, but there are fossils of dinosaurs down here, which is now covered with ice. Everywhere you look at are fossils. So this is really talking about a mass extinction. Now, here's another picture of the explanation for the 65 million year ago mass extinction. We are told that through the scientific community that a large meteorite impacted this Yucatan area right there, that area. And it was a large asteroid, 6 miles across or so. But then what's kind of, again, it leaves me unsatisfied is that an impact of a meteorite here causes fossilization in the remote parts of China or Siberia or Australia or Antarctica. It's not that big. I mean, you can't generate that much sand, debris, and things that covers these animals instantly. And one of the things you'll see will be maybe interested in seeing is that this fossilization happened quickly. I mean, it was like seconds or even, less. So again, this is a problem. I'm going to talk about how our fossils formed. This is a picture of a fossil. And so one of the things that they noticed was that these animals were quickly buried in sand and sediment and compressed. So those are the two ingredients to form fossils. If an animal dies and is covered by dirt or whatever, it's not fossilized. It has to be buried quickly in sand because they find these fossils in sandstone. The reason they find it in sandstone, because they're covered in sand. And not only that, they are covered in sand, but they had to be compressed by a large weight. So you had to have this large water column that compresses the buried animal and causes it to be a fossil. So the other thing to note here is that fossil formation is very rare. We don't see it here because we don't have the combination of rapid burial in sand and compression with the column of water. Okay. I'm just going to go through this quickly. And again, today we have landslides. Animals get buried by mud flows, but they're not fossilized. What is missing is the rapid burial and very large compression force of the organism. And this, again, this large compression is the key. You had this column of water pushing down on this sediment with the animals mixed in it. So what does the fossil record show? Some of these fossils are just incredible. It basically shows that this happened so fast in some instances that you have a snapshot. If you had a camera, you took a picture of it, this is what you would see. It's not something that occurred over a long period of time. There's a suffering that's indicated by the contortion of the neck of animals, suffocation. You see mass burials of bones, graves, and that carried by an avalanche of water and mud, and it almost reminds you of what you would see in a great tsunami, where animals and debris are caught together and are churned and are settled down. But what happened in the flood is much, much greater. You see in the fossil records, you see tremendous carnage that ripped the animals apart and scattered their bones all over the place. Again, this is not your typical animal falling down, dying, and getting covered with dust and what have you. So the other interesting thing is, and this is, again, is not mentioned, that we find fossils of dinosaurs and mammals all over the world in sedimentary rock and in sand and mud. It's the same medium, but you find dinosaurs who, according to the evolutionary theory, should have lived hundreds of millions of years ago, and then the mammals, who are tens of thousands of years, they're all there. They're in the same medium. I like this one. This is a artist reconstruction of a dinosaur fossil. These two dinosaurs are in a death battle. This velociraptor has his arms and claws on this particular protoceratop. And the protoceratop is fighting back. He got his arm in his jaw, and he got him pinned down with his legs. So this is what they found. So this is the fossil that they found. This is the protoceratop and the velociraptor. As you can see, the leg pushing him down, the claws digging in. So again, this happened so fast that when they were buried in sand, these guys didn't have time to break and say, okay, we'll get back together later. My favorite one is this. I love this particular one. This is a fossil of a pterosaur. I'm always having trouble with that. And this other guy, which I won't even attempt to pronounce. But this fossil is supposedly dated 155 million years old. And what you see here is this flying dinosaur has just caught a little fish in his claws. And he's about to fly off when this larger fish jumps up and grabs him by the leg. And both of them are fossilized instantaneously. So again, this is like an amazing snapshot that they didn't have time to break apart, to fly away, but they were buried so quickly that you see the action is still there in stone. And then you have, they found thousands of the fish swallowing another fish. Again, this is in the act of eating, and then they said there are thousands of these, so these are just a few. This is a graveyard of dinosaur bones in China. Again, you can see the large number of bones broken and scattered. Again, evidence of a major catastrophe, and it's all found in sandstone. Again, this is the medium, because as we said, this all came out from the fountains of the Great Deep, from the underground. The crust of the earth came down and buried these living organisms. Here is one from China. This particular wall of dinosaurs has more than 5,000 dinosaur fossils, and it's about 500 feet long and 6 feet deep and 26 feet tall. So again, you see all these broken dinosaur bones in one location. Here's some more in the Gobi Desert. Here is a fossil of a 50 million year old fossil bat. Now, this is not getting really embarrassing, I think, for the evolutionists, because the mammals didn't evolve until well after the dinosaurs were extinct 65 million years ago. And yet, you have this mammal, a bat, that's fossilized 45 million years ago. And also, what's kind of embarrassing is that these bats are still flying around today. They're called living fossils because you can find them in the fossil record, and you can also find them flying around. They didn't change over the 50 million year or so period. Here is a fossil of a horse, estimated to be 47 million years old. Here's a fossil of a primate, 45 million years old. Again, these are not supposed to be so close. And the other question is, what caused these mammals to be fossilized in the same way that dinosaurs were? Was there another more recent mass extinction after 65 million years? Yes, the flood. So here you can see even the hairs on this primate. Her last makeup of her meal, vegetarian snack, was found in her stomach. So it wasn't that long ago. Here's a mass grave of whales found in Chile. They're estimated to be 2 to 7 million years old. They're not, again, what caused this recent catastrophe? Graveyard of fossilized mammoths. So again, per the evolutionary theory, millions of years ago is when the dinosaurs lived, but yet we find dinosaurs and mammoth in the same sandstone. So what's wrong with this picture? This is the evolutionary picture. You see here these animals that I just showed you in the fossil record, and they evolved supposedly after the dinosaurs became extinct, but yet they are still around, and they had to be a recent extinction. Here is a picture of, again, comes from Smithsonian Institute, and if you can get this website, go there, you'll find it fascinating, because the data is recorded but not interpreted, so it's kind of nice. So this one shows all the mammals that supposedly lived after 65 million years ago to the present that have been fossilized. Again, what caused that to happen? There's, in this, about 500,000 samples of mammals fossilized. More embarrassment for evolution. You probably heard about this, but this particular coelacanth was thought to be, because it was in the fossil record, they thought to be the ancestor of all the amphibians that later evolved, came out of the ocean, and walked on land. So this may still be in your textbook. I saw that it's still being taught, but it's not correct, because what they found was off the Indian Ocean, they found this coelacanth that supposedly have lived hundreds of millions of years ago, and was the ancestor of these reptilians, alive and well, swimming in the Indian Ocean. And also the other thing they noticed was that there was no significant change between this living fish and what's in the fossil record. So again, it kind of says that evolution does not evolve, that there's no such thing as evolution. So it contradicts the theory of evolution. Okay, so now we're going to talk about something. I don't know if you ever seen this. You can get lost on the internet looking for this stuff. It's fascinating. But they found mummified dinosaurs. In other words, they found dinosaurs with tissue, muscle, tendons. Even they found their last meal in their stomach. So this is one of the guys who's supposed to be a 110 million year old armored dinosaur, 18 feet long, 3,000 pounds. And this is the mummified dinosaur that seemed dinosaur. They found him in Alberta. I think it was in the bottom of a mud seaway. Yeah. So it says found on the muddy floor of ancient seaway in Alberta, Canada. So you can see what it looked like, and it has tissues, and so they can, when they find soft tissue, now they can do carbon-14 dating on it, which they did, but they don't like the results, so they don't do it anymore because the results didn't come out to what they expected to see. Here's a 77 million year old duck-billed dinosaur, 22 feet long, 8,000 pounds. This particular one was featured in the National Geographic Society in 2017. And here is that 77 million year old duck-billed dinosaur mummified. See tissues, you can see skin, tendons, and nails, ligaments. So even his last meal in his stomach, salads of fern, was still present in his stomach. So again, soft tissue, they were surprised to see this, and they knew that soft tissue shouldn't last for millions of years, especially 77 or 110 million years. They should all have been decayed, but it was there. This is a recent discovery. I know a lot of you probably heard about this. This was an accidental discovery. They found soft tissue in a 68 million year old T-Rex. Dr. Mary Schweitzer announced, but actually this was featured in, I think, ABC News, Evening News. They accidentally did this. Supposedly the story is that they had this piece of a fossil of bone marrow, and the Dr. Schweitzer gave it to her technician and said, please clean this up, get rid of the calcium. And so she did such a good job that when she was done, they found that there was soft tissue left, which surprised everybody. So how could soft tissue be present in a 70 million year old specimen? And so this was a totally unexpected find. Not only that, they found red blood cells in the 68 million year old fossil. Even more, they found carbon-14 in this soft tissue. So again, this should be a red flag to those who are promoting a theory of evolution, that when you find carbon-14, it has to be less than 50,000 years. Because as I'll show you later on, the half-life of carbon-14, it changes into nitrogen. After 50,000 years, all the carbon-14 is gone. But that didn't stop them, no. Anyway, so they did some more testing of other dinosaurs, and they found that that one was not a fluke. It was actually, they found it in other dinosaur fossils, that it was present, the carbon-14 was there. So Dr. Schweitzer said that they found some other in 300,000-year-old woolly mammoth fossils. So the 68 million year old dinosaur fossil contained red blood cells. So here's a red blood cell under magnification that's not supposed to be there. And Dr. Mary Schweitzer said if particles of that one dinosaur were able to hang around for 65 million years, maybe the textbooks were wrong about. Is it possible that the textbooks are wrong? Yes. So maybe the textbooks were wrong about fossilization. So here's evidence. Okay, so here's some more discovery. So they've discovered in Montana a triceratops horn. It's right there. That through carbon-14 dating, they dated it to be 34,000 years old, not millions and hundreds of millions of years old. And so now this is challenging the view of where did the 65 million years come from. And again, I'm just going to go back to what I said in the beginning, that those dates when these dinosaurs lived and died is not based on scientific measurement. It's strictly based on the experts who came up with these definitions. Well, this guy lived this time, this one, so we need this much time for this animal to evolve to this one. These are strictly arbitrary. So, quick review of carbon-14 dating. What is carbon-14? Carbon-14 is found in the atmosphere, in our atmosphere. It's a isotope of nitrogen. So what you have is nitrogen gas in the atmosphere is bombarded by neutrons from the sun, and it converts it into carbon-14. So carbon-14 hangs around. It's not stable. It's going to decay because it's radioactive. So it hangs around, but it combines with oxygen through photosynthesis. Food is produced that contains carbon-14. The plants produce it. It's in the plants. Animals eat it. So it's in the animal. And then it stores it in the body. So when the animal dies, or the plant, it has the carbon-14 amount frozen, captured in his body. And so what it is, it represents a snapshot of what the concentration of carbon-14 atom to the normal carbon-12 atom is. It's a snapshot. It's there. It's not changing. Once the animal buried, it can't take in carbon-14 from the atmosphere anymore. But what happens is the carbon-14 starts to change into nitrogen. And the time how much carbon-14 you have in that specimen compared to carbon-12 gives you an idea how long the plant or animal has been alive or not. So just a quick, not to get too technical, but this shows how rapidly carbon-14 decays. In about 50,000 years, all the carbon-14 has changed into nitrogen. There's nothing left. So the dating depends on what was the ratio of carbon-14 in the atmosphere to carbon-12. So we don't know that before the flood. So that's why what they do now is they assume that the conditions back a long time ago was the same as it is now. So they use today's atmospheric model of ratios and say, well, based on that, here's how old it should be. But that's not correct, because the carbon-14 back then, and I'll show you why, it was different. Because the planet was warmer, it had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to trap the heat in. So the dating is approximate, but not very accurate. So there's a large uncertainty in the age if you look at something that's before the flood. It's pretty good if you have something that was captured like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, because the atmosphere then and now is probably the same. So here is a table. I hope you can see it. These are dinosaurs that were tested for carbon-14 and dated based on carbon-14. Different types of dinosaurs, different dates that the testing was done, different location. So this is the range of that. Now this is a plot of that same data that shows the range of dinosaurs based on carbon-14. It basically says that the age of the dinosaurs ranged from 21,000 to 39,000 years before present. It turns out that when they did the carbon-14 dating on mammoth, they came up with the same range, 22,000 to 40,000. I mean, that's remarkably close. So it says that the dinosaurs and the mammoth were contemporaries. They lived at the same time, not millions of years apart. Okay, I'm just going to touch on this just briefly, because it's maybe a little too technical, but you can see this when it gets put on the internet. But this is where the error comes in. If you assume today's atmosphere, where you have right now, in our atmosphere, you have one carbon-14 atom per trillion carbon dioxide, or carbon-12 atoms. That's the ratio. But if the conditions before the flood was warmer, which we feel it was because you have all this tropical vegetation all over the world, it would increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because you need carbon dioxide to trap the heat in at night or during the day. So that means that if I find a ratio of carbon 14 to carbon 12, this one, and I assume the post-flood atmosphere, today's atmosphere, it will give me a date based on this ratio of about 24,000 years BC. But in reality, that specimen may only be 5,000 years old, because if I correct for the atmosphere that was before the flood, it could be this. This is not a hard number, but this is just to show you that there are large errors in the carbon-14 dating. But the thing is that if there's carbon-14 present, then it's not millions of years old, because carbon-14 would be gone. So part summary. Evidence of Earth shows that it went from green to a desert in a twinkling of an eye 5,000 years ago. And that's actually the quote is the twinkling of an eye, boom. Green desert, green Sahara to Sahara filled with hundreds of feet of sand, boom, happened instantaneously. These large sand dunes and fossilization of dinosaurs and mammoth appear all over the world. There's just not a certain location that you have it everywhere. So again, it supports the view that the flood was a worldwide destruction. It was not a local, it was a global destruction. Some of the fossils, as you saw, looked like they were frozen in time. They were in the middle of an activity, and they were buried and fossilized. The civilization came to an end 2400 BC, again consistent with the flood. And then, I like this one. It may not get you excited about world population, but to me, looking at the world population rise and extrapolating it back to the time of the flood, to me is strong evidence, but the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Discovery of mummified dinosaurs and soft tissues indicates that dinosaurs died out recently. Again, carbon-14 dating indicates that they are thousands of years old, not millions, same as mammoths. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my other favorite part, which is the Ice Age. And you're going to be, hopefully I can open it. Okay. What's the magic word here? Oh, I got to get in here. Oh, there it is. Okay. Ice Age. I love this picture. This shows Greenland ice sheets. And, it's interesting that scientists don't know, but they call it an ice age. I don't call it an ice age. I call it a lot of ice coming down in a very short period of time and burying things. It's not an age like as some of the scientists concluded, was like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, duration. But they don't know what caused all this ice to form on Greenland and the Arctic and Antarctica. So again, these are quotes that when they try to describe, I think this came from a NOVA program. They started describing it, and they said, the Earth's climate has been warm for hundreds of millions of years, okay? It began getting cooler, first slowly, then in a twinkling of an eye, huge ice sheets began to form, eventually reaching depths of over a mile. Twinkling of an eye, I like that, because that's what it was. It happened, boom, like this. And I like this admission. There's no real explanation of how this happened. There isn't. But the Bible, as you'll see, has the explanation for it, because it describes the scenario and the mechanism of how these ice sheets were formed. So this is a map of Greenland, And right here in the middle, I circled a location which they called Greenland Ice Sheet Project 2, GISP2. And in this area, they drilled down to 10,000 feet. So, okay, I kind of jumped ahead of myself, but here they found like 10,000 feet depth of ice on Greenland. Similarly on the Antarctica. And what was amazing, what they found was at the bottom of this 10,000, now 10,000 feet, if you remember, if you're flying an airplane, that's when the captain says, you know, it's not okay to turn on your electronic devices. That's 10,000 feet. So next time you're on an airplane, look down and say, okay, that's how much ice is there in the center of Greenland. But what's amazing is at the bottom of this ice sheet, they found ice mixed with silty sand. So this particular one represents about a, looks like a 3 feet section with rings. Again, they noticed this and they saw that this silt is superfine dirt with clay sand, and that they said that this sand and silty sand exists at the bottom of oceans and lakes. So how did it get there? They have no idea. They had admitted that they don't know. This is not your normal annual snowfall where you have snow and then silty ice mixing and then more stuff. It's not like that. They don't know. It's a mystery. How could more than 10 feet of ice silt end up in the middle of Greenland, hundreds of miles from the ocean? There's no scientific explanation for the source of the fine silt or mechanism of how it came. This is a confession, no explanation. So these next pictures represent different sections in this 10,000-foot ice core. This is the bottom, the brown, and the top. You see the rings there, because the rings are there as the snow and the sediment settled, it separated itself. So the scientists were excited about this because they interpreted this as being annual rings, that each ring represents a year of snow melt and thaw and things like that. So they spent literally millions of dollars counting the number of rings in this 10,000-foot ice core. And they counted 190,000 rings, and therefore they concluded that therefore this has to be 190,000 years old, because there's 190,000 layers there. But what they ignored was another piece of evidence that they also measured at the same time they drilled down to the bottom of the Greenland, is that they measured the temperature of this ice core. This is a picture, a plot of the temperature of the ice core from the top to the bottom. This is in meters, so multiplied by 3, that's 10,000 feet. So what's interesting about this is that this ice is super cold. It's not normal snow. Normal snow, when it gets to be like minus 18 degrees Celsius, there is no snow because there's no humidity in the atmosphere. This ice was generated in a completely different way. And it shows that all this came down at once. It came down suddenly. And that over time, the heating from below, from the geothermal heat coming back through the crust of the earth, is warming up the ice sheet. And so that's why it's warmer at the bottom than it is at the top. It's warming here. It's warm. It hasn't been there long enough for all of it to be warmed up, but it's on the way. So this, to understand how the ice sheet was formed, whether there's an ice age or not, this piece of evidence is really key. But it's not being interpreted, not being used, because they have no explanation. The scientific community has no explanation of how supercold ice could be formed, plus how supercold ice with sand mixed in it, how it would be formed, how it could be available. So, and then this is just a picture that if the ice is colder than minus 17.8 degrees, there is no snow. Basically, the data shows that this could not have accumulated over tens of thousands of years with embedded silk. So the counting of the rings is irrelevant. You can't, again, I go back to the scientific approach when I said that a scientific approach is one that uses all the evidence, not just some of it. You can't ignore this. This is shouting at you that says, look, tell me how this was formed. But they ignore it. You probably won't hear anything about this in a discussion about the Ice Age. They have the data, they don't know what to do with it. So, me being an analyst, I love to analyze things. And so this is a picture of the ice sheet being heated from below, from geothermal heating. And fortunately, you can analyze this because you don't have to worry about what's happening on the surface. Because the top 100 meters of this ice is still the same as cold as it is in the middle. So whatever solar activity is over the thousands of years or millions of years has no effect on it because it hasn't penetrated down. It's all being heated from the bottom. And that made it nice. Because if it's being heated from the bottom, then you can put a conduction model together and see what happens. So before I show you that result, I wanted to show you that the Greenland ice sheet and the ice sheet in Antarctica are about the same depth. You have, in the Greenland ice sheet, you have 3,050 meters depth. In the Antarctica, in this particular location, was 2,800 meters deep. So what that tells me is that why are they the same? They are the same because the duration of this ice deposit at Greenland and Antarctica was the same. This event was the same event. Had it been a lot different, then you couldn't make that connection. But because they're about the same, you can say that this phenomenon happened in a period of time on Greenland and on the other side of the world in Antarctica. So there's not going to be a test on this, but for those who are interested, this is the conduction model. And I've written many of those, and you could actually, if you were college students or high school student, you could do this. These equations are not that complicated. So what you have is heat coming into the bottom. It gets warmed up. Some of the heat gets conducted up. No. Okay. So this is the basic model. And the model that I had 40 nodes, and I changed it to see if the answers would come out differently. It didn't. So here it is, the ice core temperature data from Greenland. And if I could have a drum roll right now. Thank you. So this is what the analysis showed, that if you start this process 2,400 years ago, the blue line is where you would expect this ice core temperature to look like. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, not only the magnitude here is the same, but the slope of the curve is the same. Now, there are inaccuracies here, I admit it. It's not like, right on, no error. But there's also unknown, because what I did was I just looked at the geothermal heating from the bottom, which we know how much heat comes through the Earth. But there's also other heat that I didn't include, which represents the heat stored in the crust and the ground below. So that also adds to the heat. So that's why I came up with a 40% higher heat flux going into the ice core than the actual steady state heat conduction from the Earth. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you like that. So, what about 10,000 years? Because that's being thrown around as, the last ice age was 10,000 years ago. So this is the curve that shows that if this process started 10,000 years ago, then the black line is where the temperature should be. It would be much warmer. It still would be there, but it would be much warmer. So I just want to reassure you that the Greenland ice sheet is going to be around for thousands of more years left. It's not going away. And so even if it did all melted, the amount of ice on Greenland would only raise the sea level by about 25 feet or so. But anyway, there's a lot of energy or cold energy stored in the ice that will take time before it gets reheated. I did this thing, and I suggest, again, if you're a high school student or a college student, if you've taken Physics 101 or whatever, you can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation. You don't have to do a conduction model. You can just do an analysis. If I had a chunk of ice and I was heating it at a certain rate, how long would it take for all that ice to go from a super cold state to the melting point? And that's what I did. These equations are here, assumptions and everything else. But the answer is, for the ice core, for this depth, 10,000 feet, and the initial temperature of minus 31 degrees Celsius, it would take over 46,000 years for all that ice to melt as a steady state. So the idea of this ice being there for 190,000 years, it really contradicts analysis. And this is something that's missing, again, is missing from the scientific community. They do not check their answers. This is I call it a back of the envelope check, because there's only a few equations that you have to deal with. So how was the ice sheet formed? Well, as I mentioned to you, that the Bible says that the fountains of the great deep broke open and it ejected this water into the atmosphere. And I think it even ejected debris that impacted the moon, as we saw on the craters on one side of the moon is different than the other one. So we're looking at a cataclysm that we have no comparison to. There's nothing like a volcanic eruption. It doesn't come anywhere close to this. But this particular chart shows that if you eject water into the upper atmosphere, if you have ejected to 190,000 feet elevation, you'll produce minus 32 degrees Celsius, which is what is the temperature in Greenland. If you eject it to 240,000 feet, then you get the temperature that you see on Antarctica. Okay. I don't know if I should, maybe if you don't mind, I'll just take a second. I worked on the space shuttle program. We had an issue where we had hundreds of pounds of liquid hydrogen trapped in the feed line and 3,000 pounds of oxygen trapped in the feed line. And there was an issue about how do we get rid of this if the shuttle has to have an abort and come back and land on the landing site with all this hydrogen still trapped in the feed line. It represented a bomb because hydrogen would leak into the F compartment. There's oxygen around, and it's a ticking time bomb. So it was a kind of a showstopper. We didn't know what to do. But fortunately, we would only have to worry about that in case there was an abort. So I wrote a program, and I showed that if you eject this liquid hydrogen or liquid oxygen in space at a very high altitude, much higher than this, you will freeze the liquid hydrogen and oxygen into fine droplets fine crystals of ice. And we demonstrated that on STS-51 when Senator Gore, the first senator to fly, I think was the last senator too, who flew on the shuttle. They did the demo worked fine, and they reported back to us that what they saw was that the entire space shuttle on orbit was covered with ice. They saw ice crystals on the windshield of the orbiter. It was that fine. I mean, boom, it generated. So this analysis is really founded, well, it's on the physics of the properties of water, but also verified through testing flight demo. So I told you I selected 10,000 atmosphere for the interior compartment of the underground cavity, because in order to get to that altitude, 190,000 feet or 240,000 feet, you need somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 7,000 atmosphere to eject it. And this is a simple calculation. This is the same equation that if you throw up a rock, depending on the velocity, it'll go to a certain altitude and come back down. This is the same thing. You convert the pressure inside the underground and convert it into dynamic pressure and velocity, and you can calculate how far it would go. So that's why I chose 10,000 feet, because I wanted to cover myself, besides the properties were available here. So we're going to talk about some other findings. Oops, I'm going to have to go faster here. Okay, I'm going to skip if you don't mind. What's interesting, what's coming out now, is that they're discovering that animals they're found in permafrost. That what is permafrost? Permafrost, this is permafrost. It's a mixture of sand and fine ice. And again, the scientists don't have an explanation of how this is formed. This is not your annual rainfall. This is a mixture. Again, it makes sense, and it's easy to see that if you have this water and mud and things ejected in the atmosphere, it gets mixed up, comes back down. But what's even, well, here's another picture. Some of the permafrost is not thin. It can be up as much as 3,000 feet deep. What they find in this permafrost are fossils of mammoth, and now they're finding fossils of dinosaurs in the Arctic region. And they're not supposed to be, dinosaurs should not be living in the Arctic region. So they're finding thousands of them. There's so many mammals that they found that it actually became an industry to harvest the ivory. I read somewhere that they said something like 90% of all the ivory that we have around came from mammoth tusk. It's not from African elephant tusk, but from mammoth tusk. They're finding bones of prehistoric animals that are there. And there's no explanation for that, because if these animals died naturally, then they would be consumed by the predators. But they see a sudden change in the climate. This was not a gradual event, it was sudden. If it was a gradual event, then the animals would just migrate to a warmer spot and be safe. But because it was a sudden event, they couldn't. Okay. Now some of the pictures, I'll go through these fast. These are fun. This is a steppe bison found in Alaska, and you can see he's completely buried in this permafrost. They're digging him out, or her. And then these are cave bears brought from the permafrost. This is the head of the Ice Age wolf. Here's a picture of a woolly rhino. Here's a picture of a colt found in the permafrost in Siberia. I like this one because this one shows the mammoth encased in this ice. It's completely, So this guy, this Berezovka mammoth in Siberia, it's got a lot of fame. He was found in the early 18th century or so, and they found that he was buried in the permafrost. But what was interesting is that the permafrost was similar to what they found at the bottom of the Greenland ice sheet. So it kind of implies that the process was the same. But it had remains of of his stomach were intact, and there were grasses and buttercups lodged between its teeth. So again, this this poor soul, this poor mammoth, as he was munching on the buttercups, he got suddenly buried in permafrost and died. Flesh was still edible. Here's a picture of a woolly mammoth. And I'm just going to go faster here about her. And so apparently, they admit this was a BBC News article that they said that the last mammoth died out about 2000 BC. Well, again, it's kind of supports the theory of the biblical flood. They found dinosaurs in the Arctic, encased in ice block. Paleontologists working on the top of a frozen Antarctic mountain have extracted a rock and ice fossil popsicles encasing the remains of a massive, previously unknown dinosaur. They estimated that he was about 190 million years old, but lived in a much warmer climate than exists. Yeah, it had to be. So the question is, how could a dinosaur that lived in a tropical environment 190 million years ago be buried and frozen in ice, not under ice, but in ice, when the ice age was supposed to be more recent? Here's some recent discovery. I mean, this came out like 2008. They've discovered these dinosaurs in permafrost in Alaska, different species. So again, hundreds of fossils locked in permafrost, at least 70 million years old. And interestingly, discovery that they lived and thrived in the Arctic has taken everyone by surprise. Yes. It challenges everything we think we know about dinosaurs. Yes. So, okay, I think this is a summary chart. Okay, I think I covered this. Okay, I'm just going to go to the next one because the next one is going to be interesting about the continental separation, and I'll only take about 10 minutes on that. But you'll find that interesting because, okay, I got to go back here. Okay. I never thought much about the continental separation, to be frank, to be honest with you, because I was so influenced by the theory of evolution that, of course, they claim that the continental separation occurred hundreds of millions of years ago. And you'll see the basis for that time, hundreds of millions of years ago. So I thought, well, maybe they're right. But according to the past, there was a single continent called Pangaea. As you can see, the continents that are all united. Now, may not have been the way it looked like, but it was one. So this guy, who was the father of the continental separation, he realized that there were dinosaur fossils on Africa and South America that are now separated by thousands of miles. Also, this guy, Listersaurus, he was on Africa, India, and Antarctica. Wow, that's interesting. And then this guy, Mesosaurus, was both Africa and South America. So he concluded if they were there and they found fossils, it must mean that these were land animals that they could go back and forth. So they had to be connected. They had to be a land bridge. Another interesting thing that he pointed out is that there's a large quantity of fossil coal that is present in the Arctic region, which right now doesn't have any vegetation, even in Antarctica. So he concluded that correctly, that Antarctica could not have been always at the South Pole. And then, of course, you saw these that where the continents kind of fit together, showing that they one time were together. Same type of rock on both sides of the Atlantic, on America, England, all the way to Scandinavia. So when did the continents separate? So again, no one can measure that. No one can know independently when the continents separated. What they base it on is the fossil record that because according to evolution, this particular dinosaur, according to them, lived 250 to 300 million years ago. Therefore, the continents had to divide 250 to 300 million years ago. That's the logic behind it. There's no science behind it. This is just based on a theory. So, the Bible talks about the continental drift, and I'm constantly amazed that the Bible talks about things that we discover, thousands of years later, but it's there. It made a comment. It talked about that. And you probably have read this before, that about 100 years after the flood, this person, whose name is Peleg, it makes a comment that in his days was the earth divided. It just makes a side note. And this is found in both in Genesis 10:25 and also in 1 Chronicles 1:19. In his days was the earth divided. So, because Peleg only lived 35 years before he had his descendant, it means that it wasn't 136 years, because then the next guy would have been attributed for the continental divide. It had to be within his lifetime. So, the continental drift is in the Bible. So now what's interesting is that the word that is used for divide is the word Peleg, and it means split or separate. There's a different word that is used for the division of the nations. This word is only used once in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles when it talks about the earth being divided. There's another word that is used for the division of nations. It's called Peleg. And this is the reference that says, these are the families of the sons of Noah that after their generation, and by these were the nations divided, Peleg, not Peleg. So there's a difference. It clearly points to the fact that 2,300 years ago, when Peleg was alive, is when the continents divided. Okay, I did a simplified model. Like I said, I love analysis, and I kind of enjoy it. And when the answers come out right, I get really excited. But this is so complicated. Try to model the continental motion due to convection of the magma. I mean, it's impossible. And no one has done that. No one has tried to come up. They accept the 250, 300 million year time period as being the time, because they thought, these continents are far apart, they're big. I mean, they have to move slow, and they have to take time to get there. But I did an analysis, a very simple analysis, because you can do things like that without understanding all the details. So we know that right now the continent of Africa and South America are about 4,300 miles apart. And we also know that sorry, I gave it away. I didn't want to do that. Okay. And also, I didn't see this. So also these continents today are moving at 2 centimeters per year. So they say that's the same speed as your fingernail is growing out on your finger. So we have 3 data points. You have the time when it started. You have the distance that it has to be now, 4,300 miles, and the speed at which it's moving is 2 centimeters per year. So you can make an assumption, without, like I said, knowing all the details. You can say, well, the speed is proportional to the distance. In other words, when the continents were closer to each other, then they were moving faster. As they moved apart, they slowed down. The reason they're slowing down is because more mass is being added by the magma to the continental plates. So it's like pushing on a block. When it's lighter, you can push it faster, but when it gets heavier, you push it slow with the same force. So without knowing all of that, you can make an assumption, well, is that speed versus distance, is it proportional, linear, 1-for-1? Or does it have some higher second order function? So I did both of them to see what excuse me, and I wanted to see, if this started at 2300 BC, how fast did the breakaway speed had to be for the continents to move into the place where they are now and move at this 2 centimeter per year rate? So this is the answer. It came out that the speed varies for the two assumptions, 3 to 7 miles per year. Now, to put that in perspective, a garden snail moves at 250 miles per year. So this is like more than 1/10 the speed of a garden snail moving. So it wasn't like, here we go, the continents are dividing and we got to hold on to a tree, otherwise we fall down. It's very slow. And what it was showing is that it didn't take millions of years or hundreds of millions of years. And again, that number only comes as an assumption. But it showed that by the time you get to King David of Israel, the continents are like 90 to 97% in place for where they are right now. So it happened very fast, and it doesn't require hundreds of millions of years for these plates to get into place. Okay, so that's what about that? So here's the interesting thing. Is there really no adequate explanation of how animals after the flood and humans after the flood got to these remote areas? If the continents were separated by thousands of miles as they are today, the animals, the humans, would have a hard time migrating to Australia, or for the animals to migrate to South America. So this is a picture, and I apologize for going through fast here, but this is what you are taught in school, that the animals migrated from Asia to South America through the Bering Straits. So that sounds like a good story, but the problem is that there are tropical animals that live here that don't live here in the Arctic. You can't have tropical animals that live in the jungle that don't live here to end up here. Otherwise, they have to swim the ocean, and So this is a key part of the Bible scenario because it completes everything. It shows that humans could travel from where the ark landed to the remotest parts of China within a year by walking at a leisurely rate. Animals could migrate from the ark to the remote parts of the earth, to South America, Australia, in a very short time. And it's important. And evolution and science doesn't have an answer. They don't know how these animals got there. Okay, so how did I do that? I went backwards. Okay, so just to close out, these are the animals that live in the South American jungle, and so they could not have evolved across the Bering Strait and end up on their own. So I am on my last slide, so thank you for your patience. But so again, there's evidence for the continent divide that it occurred at the time of the flood. So there was one event, was the water levels rising cover everything, the sand and ice covering everything, destroying all life form, fossilizing, forming permafrost, and entombing all these animals. So this was a mass extinction event that I'm not going to bore you with that. But I would like to show you this, because this is, I told you I have a scorecard that I want to show you, comparing the theory of evolution and the Bible. And if I can open it, that would be good. Oh, okay, gotta go off. Okay, there it is. And I'm almost done. So, yes. So what did we learn? Before my last chart, I want to show you. Dinosaurs and mammals lived at the same time per the carbon-14 dating. The flood occurred 2400 BC. All living things, including dinosaurs, died at once, just like the Bible said, all flesh. I gave you an explanation of how the ice was formed on Greenland and Antarctica, the super ice, cold temperature. How permafrost was formed. Again, it's a mixture of ice. Continental separation started 2300 BC. Humans and animals could migrate to the remotest part. And by the way, I threw this in here because I know people talk about the gap theory. And the gap theory is what's happened in Genesis chapter 1, the first verse, which says that, and God created heaven and the earth became dark and void. So people have interpreted that to mean that the earth becoming dark and void represents a catastrophe where Satan destroyed God's original creation, namely the dinosaurs, and God had to recreate it. Well, it didn't happen. It happened recently at the flood. So the gap theory is completely wrong. Also, the water canopy theory is wrong because the water didn't come from the upper atmosphere, come down. It came from down below because that's what the Bible says. Now my final chart. So this is a scorecard. I don't know how well you can read it, but I'll read it to you. So I have two columns. I have evidence that was explained by evolution or the scientific community and the Bible. The first one is that why did Sahara turn from green to desert 5,000 years ago? Cricket, cricket, cricket. Why are there large sand dunes hundreds of feet deep on the Sahara all the way to the Gobi Desert? No answer. What caused the early civilization suddenly to come to an end around 4000 BC? No answer. What caused the Ice Age? No answer. How was the super cold ice deposited on Greenland at minus 32 degrees and Antarctica minus 53 degrees? No answer. Why is there silt, mud, mixed with fine ice at the bottom of the 10,000 feet Greenland ice core? No answer. Why is there ice on Greenland if it was deposited 190,000 years ago? It should have been already melted about 50,000 years ago. No answer. How was permafrost formed, and why are there thousands of prehistoric animals buried in all over the Arctic? No answer. Why is there carbon-14 in dinosaur soft tissue? It's supposed to be gone in 50,000 years. No answer. Why are dinosaurs and prehistoric mammals found in permafrost? No answer. Why are there dinosaur fossils frozen in ice on Antarctica? And again, not under the ice, but in ice. No answer. Why does carbon-14 dating of dinosaur soft tissues and mammoth give the same date of 20 to 40,000? No answer. And by the way, as I showed you, there can be as much as 20,000 year error depending on what the early atmosphere was like. Why are there mammals fossil after the last mass extinction 65 years ago? No answer. How did animals that live in the South American jungle get there if the continents separated 250 million years ago before mammoths and tropical birds evolved? What single event caused the fossilization of dinosaurs all over the world? Sand and water. No answer. Why does Greenland ice temperature show that it was deposited 2400 BC? No answer. Why is current world population level 7.6 billion if man had been around for 10,000 years? So this is my final scorecard to show you that the theory of evolution has a lot of holes. They cannot explain. When they don't have an answer, they just ignore it, and they keep going and promoting their theory because the alternate is to accept the Bible version, and that's a no-no to them. They do not want to deal with that. So they'll stick with it, And so you be aware what the evidence is there. So I hope you, I don't know, I think there's going to be a YouTube video. By the way, one more other thing, Robin, and I'm done, I'm really done, is I've taught on this 3 years ago in 2018 at Calvary Chapel Beachside, and there are some YouTube videos, not as good as what you're going to have here, because I've made some updates, but it's there in case you want to find it. It's under my name, Tibor Locke. Put in there Dinosaurs, Ice Age, and Flood, and you can find it. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your attention. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Here's what we'll do. We'll finish here. It's 12 o'clock, so we're right at the 12 o'clock time. Anyone who needs to go can go. We'll allow 15 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to ask a question, you could do so. There's a microphone in the middle. So is anybody wanting to ask any questions after the presentation? You could stand up to the middle. If there is no one, of course, you could come up and talk to Tibor afterwards also.
Yep, that would be good.
Gordon, go ahead. If anybody else wants to ask a question, could you just stand 6 feet behind Gordon, and we'll just know how many questions we have. I'll just stay up here in case you want me to answer it, Gordon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll take the easy, hard question, you take the easy, and I'll decide which is hard and easy. Something like that.
As Christians get asked a lot about the Grand Canyon from the evolutionists and the people who don't believe. Could you give us a brief summary of your take on that?
I, on purpose, didn't want to cover that subject because there are a lot of better people that can talk about that. But I do believe that, if you can start to imagine what happened here, this was a total catastrophe. So for water to flow down, going back into the fountains of the great deep, there was a lot of water flowing, and that water flow eroded things. I mean, they find things even in America, large boulders that apparently carved circles in the hard rock that they can't explain away except for a large rush of water flow. So I totally accept the explanation on the Grand Canyon. It's definitely another evidence. I'm just not qualified I'm not a geologist to comment, other than I think it's another piece of evidence. Thank you.
Hi there. Really cool work on the oh gosh, I'm too short for this. Really cool work on the analysis and stuff. I'm curious if, so I'm like a graduate student, and obviously the research is something that I'm super interesting, right, in the academic discussion. Have you thought about
writing? It might help just for the question with your mask down, just for the question.
Have you thought about writing a paper, publishing and putting that out into the academic world, and then seeing what the response is and being able to validate or see maybe there's things you missed or that you can start proving things?
Good question, good question. And yes, I've been doing some of that, but you know what? I've been sending notes to Dr. Ross's YouTube video. I don't get an answer back. I don't know if it's my notes or comments are too late, but it's very hard to penetrate that particular environment. I'm interested, I'm planning on maybe releasing short videos of this and maybe even publishing it. I do want to have a chance to talk at other colleges, universities, because I think the evidence is really clear. Honestly, I don't know how you feel about this, but of course I'm too close to the subject, but I don't see anything there in evolution that explains anywhere near what we see, the evidence. Their explanations are at best, smoke and mirror. So I'm hoping to do that, but I do want to continue with YouTube videos and maybe even write something along the way. Thank you for your question.
Devin, keep your eye on our YouTube channel because we've recorded all this, and then what is there now is there, but in the future, coming weeks, it'll be different what's published. They're easier to view and better quality.
Hi. So one thing I noticed about how you talked about when all the dinosaurs went extinct is during the flood and all, but technically, some of them, because God said 2 of every kind of animal were on the flood, were on. the ark.
Yes.
And I remember I think some of them still, like the different kinds, some of them still existed for a while even after the flood, because we still have like stories and records of like different, of like all these stories of like dragons and all these different big creatures that are still out there. And even I went to the big Ark exhibit in the Creation Museum about 2 years ago, and I remember how they talked about like how the story, like these different stories of like the dragons, including like Saint George and the dragon, like even I've even read books that talk about like how some of them were like.
I have a chart on this. I know where you're going, and actually I anticipated this question. So if I can just, for the sake of time, show you what your question is and what the answer is. So what you're talking about is, did Noah take the dinosaurs on the ark? And this is from the ark exhibit. This is a picture of the dinosaurs that you see there. And the answer is no. The answer is no. The reason people entertain this thought is because they reference Job. That Job makes a comment about the dinosaurs. God describes these great behemoth mammoths that lived. And let's see, I think I have no, never mind. Okay. Forgive me, I went too far. So the Bible, God talks to Job and says, have you considered the behemoth, or this other large creature? What do you think of it? And of course, Job had to know who that was, because God is telling him to think about that. So that doesn't mean that Job lived after the flood and saw the dinosaurs. To me, what it means is that Job lived before the flood and saw the dinosaurs, and he knew what it was. Why would God take dinosaurs on the ark if they would die out, become extinct? Because the vegetation and the food chain is completely different. There's another clue in that, is that, in the book of Job, it starts out with the sons of God came to God to talk, and Satan is among them. Where do we find the phrase sons of God? It's before the flood, when it says, and the sons of God saw the children of the daughters of women, and had children with them. So the correct scenario is not that dinosaurs lived after the flood, because they didn't. We don't have any of them alive now. But the dinosaurs lived before the flood, and Job lived before the flood. That's how he could see who they were, and they knew, and God could refer to that.
From what I've heard, though, Job existed around the same time as Abraham did.
Yep, that's what they say.
that-
That's what they say. But there's no evidence of that. See, it's just people make an assumption here that Job and Abraham were contemporaries. But the Bible doesn't give you the date when Job was born. The fact to me that he witnessed dinosaurs, and he refers to the sons of God, puts it on the other side of the flood, not after the flood.
Why don't you ask one more question? I think, again, there could be differing opinions of were there dinosaurs on the ark or not. It doesn't really change what you've presented today.
No, that doesn't. But this is a question that keeps coming up, and I think I think this would be my answer, is that Job lived before the flood, not after the flood.
So that would be one answer, and then like Ken Ham's view is that he took two of each on the ark. But I think again that's probably where that question would end.
Right.
Any last question?
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit more about the ice that in Iceland, Greenland, and Antarctica? They talked about annular rings, but my question is, if there's annular ring formed by ice melting and freezing again, how could you count the rings after it melted the first time?
Oh, sorry,
How could you count rings if it's melted?
No, that wasn't melted. The ice core they extracted was consistent. That's why the pictures show them that they're the rings. They're still frozen, deeply frozen. And so they could count the rings. But they assumed that the rings were formed by an annual snow melting, refreeze, and stuff like that. So that's why they concluded that, because they don't have any other examples of how ice is formed. They went back to what we see today, which is sometimes not good, because you're limited to what is happening today. Today, if we saw ice layers, it would obviously be snow and layers of ice. But here, we have evidence of ice that is super cold. It's not normal ice. It's ice mixed with sand. So,
But if it's formed by, you said each year that it snowed and then melted and then
no, I didn't mean to say that. If I did, I didn't mean to say that. What I was saying is that the ice came down as an event in a very short time. The ice, this super cold ice mixed with sand and silt came down at once.
Right. I understand that part of it. I'm talking about their theory that it's formed by melting and freezing, melting, freezing.
Yep.
And under their theory, how could there be rings when it's melting all the time or constantly melting? And that part I don't understand.
You would have to ask them, because I don't know. But that's what they said. They have no other experience, and they don't know what to do with the rings. They see the rings, and they say, well, the rings are there, but how did it form? They don't accept the fact that, or maybe don't even know that this came down at once, and these layers stratified out as the liquid and the ice and the sand settled down. It settled down in layers. So they don't even know about that or won't accept it. So the only other alternative they have is count the rings and say, well, these represents annual years. But the big problem they have, as I showed you, that the heat leak from the bottom of the earth, that's a constant, that's a given. It's so much that there's no way that ice core could remain super cold or even ice after 190,000 years. So this is where they have to resolve the temperature data and the ice ring data, because they don't match. They're completely different.
Okay, yeah. My point was just that in their theory, they seem to have disintegrated their own theory by saying that it melted.
No, they didn't say it was melted. It was just saying that as it accumulated each year, the snow melted, and then it snowed again, and then you had a new layer, and year after year for 190,000 years, this ice sheet depth kept growing, increasing yearly. Does that make it a little bit better?
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, maybe I'll have to talk to you later. It's just that even your explanation, you used the word that it melted. And then if it's melted, then it gets mixed, with the previous year and the years before. So how could they say that it was annular when the evidence is melted,
And I think what Tibor was saying was it happened all at once, but they're interpreting it as happening over 190,000 years. So you guys can talk afterwards.
Yeah.
Come up afterwards and you can keep talking, because I know
you.
Tibor desires to be here as long as people have questions. Anyone else want to go to the microphone? Yeah, we got one more hand up, and we'll make you the last question at the microphone.
Hi, good day.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I have a question about the moon. So you said the large craters on the moon were caused from the lava flow. Can you expound on that?
Yes. So I think everyone agrees on that the dark spots on the moon are a result of a meteorite impacting the surface of the moon, and the heat generated by that impact caused the surface of the moon to melt and for lava to flow from underground. And that's why they're smooth, and they call it actually seas because it looks like seas. But it's a impact crater that was subsequently had lava flow come to the surface, and it covered some of the smaller craters in there. That's the idea. So it's a well accepted. So basically, what that means is to have those dark spots on the moon. You have to have a large impact of large comet or objects. I'm not going to call it comets because that's not comets, according to what I'm thinking. But large objects coming in at a very high speed, impacting the moon's, creating the moon's surface to melt, and then it resolidifies. You don't see that on the other side of the moon, which is why it's interesting, because if these impacts came from our solar system, from outside of our orbit, then they would be impacting both sides of the moon with as much energy. They would be creating these molten seas in both sides, not just one side. So the fact that it happened on one side means that there was a sudden release of this material from the Earth that went past and impacted the moon. And then the backside, you see the subsequent impact on the moon and the smaller pieces coming around and gravitationally being pulled in and impacting the backside of the moon, the far side. That's why they are different. Does that help?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've given us a time span and how things have gone up to today. Have you looked at the future and when things will collapse and Jesus has to return to put it all in order?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I had a chart I took out because I didn't want to be, I didn't know how many people would be interested. But you're talking about the population rise, right? Okay, so if you take that curve and extrapolate it in the future, according to some experts, the Earth can only support 10 billion people on the Earth. After that, things get ugly, and we don't run out of food and what have you. So you can get to that 10 billion level in 20 years, or maybe sooner. Depends, because the population growth is actually growing faster than the exponential equation. It's growing much faster. So you could say that, within the next 25, 30 years, Jesus has to come back because we're going to kill ourselves. It's going to be over.
Well,
So
that's probably a good note to finish on,
okay.
Tibor. Yeah, let's stand up and we'll just close in prayer. Why don't we just we're right here at the 12, almost 12:20. Thank you, Tibor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, why don't we just close in prayer? And, we're all in different places and different things going on in our hearts. And, the Bible says that God opposes the proud and he gives a grace to the humble. And why don't you just pray a prayer wherever you are, whatever, there could be a vast difference on where we're at in our hearts before God. But why don't you just pray a prayer that just says, God, I want to humble myself before you. Why don't you just pray that type of prayer that you humble yourself before God? And not knowing where different people are at, maybe this is a day even that and huge things are happening in your heart and your soul, and maybe this could even be a time to just acknowledge that, God, there are some really big things happening in my soul, happening in my heart. And maybe it has to do with even the very God who loves you and created you. There's that big of things happening in your soul, and you even want to just pray a prayer as we finish, just thanking God for loving you and creating you. And maybe there could even be such a big prayer in your heart that we could just all end with a type of surrender to God. Why don't we just, I'll just give a blank time here, just that last minute that you can just, if there's a desire to be surrendered to God, why don't you just pray that your own lips, that I really want to be surrendered to you and to your plan for me. And Tibor, why don't you just pray the last prayer of the
Okay.
morning?
Okay. Lord, thank you. Thank you for your witness in the Bible. Thank you for your written word, which is a lamp unto our feet. Lord, we thank you that you revealed things to us that has been a mystery for even 50 years ago that we didn't know about. But your word is true. And we thank you, Lord, that anyone who asks for wisdom, you promise to give them understanding and wisdom, your wisdom. Lord, we ask you to work in our hearts so that we would draw closer to you, to realize how absolutely magnificent and wonderful you are. You are almighty. You do things as you desire. It's your will. There's no one like you. No one can stop you. Your word is sure. You promised, Lord, that Jesus, even you said that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. So this is a promise, Lord, that you're coming back, and you're coming back to redeem us, to save us. Lord, thank you that you died for us. You paid the penalty for our sin, that we can enjoy eternity with you in heaven, with the Father, as his children. Well, what an amazing promise, Lord, that we could be there for eternity. These things that we think about right now, about the flood and all these things, are going to be immaterial and not important in about 1,000 years. We'll all know all of it. But in the meantime, Lord, help us to give answers to those who are seeking. And thank you for this church, for their faith, their witness to the community, Lord. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Oh, it was wonderful having Tibor. He'll be here tomorrow morning, too, as you think of others that would be interested. He's going to actually speak on not being afraid tomorrow. After 76 years old, why would he come to the conclusion you don't need to be afraid? That's tomorrow at 8:45. That's a mass service. If you know people that are like, that's what it would take to be at church, then that's option. And then at 10:30 is an optional service, so you can reach out and invite others. If you have questions for Tibor, he'll be here.
Yep.
If things going on in your soul, you'd like to talk to me, I'll be here. So, all right. God bless you.
Oh, thank you. Can I take this?